The Dharma talk today is titled Hope and Fear, Hope and Fear, Fear and Hope. So hope has kind of its obvious alternate is hopelessness, and the other fearlessness is the other one. But doesn't it also hope as opposed to fear? We hope something will happen, we fear that it won't, or we hope something that won't happen, we fear that it will. There's all kinds of polarity happening there. And this talk, I'm not here to tell you not to have hope or not to have any fear. We're not talking about that. I'm always talking about, probably every talk I give is about what? Awareness. Awareness. I'm not talking about accomplishing some kind of, where you're never afraid of anything, or some kind of thing where you, all of your hopes and wishes are granted, etc. So hope sometimes, though, is used in kind of a way that goes beyond just the ordinary use of it, like saying, I hope you get that job, or I hope things go well on your vacation, or I fear that I'm going to lose my job. All kinds of things come into our conversation where we use those words. And my commentary, or my this talk is not about so much about getting rid of all of that, but bringing awareness into it. It's like quite often our mind is like a lot of clouds with no sky. It's all clouds, and it's all this cloud, this thought, this idea, that opinion. And we operate with a little mental claustrophobia, if not to say paranoia, because with no sky feels scary, can at least. So in the Buddhist tradition, in particular Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the metaphor for is often used is that hope and fear are like bandits. And the hope and fear, because of the polarity involved, because it pulls you into a frame of mind that abandons your wisdom mind. This is when we don't really trust ourselves. We go towards hope. Sometimes people even market that idea. Well, you have to have hope. Well, I don't think so. If you have fear, then you might have to have hope. If you have hope, then probably what? Fear is going to arise. It's a very polarized kind of thing. Anytime you have one thing anywhere, you're creating its opposite. Just like too much good creates a whole bunch of, shall we say, non-good. And I'm not picking on anybody. I'm very respectful. I try to be very respectful to anyone's mindset or how you're operating with your mind. If you're doing fine, then I have nothing to say. I don't really respond or tell anybody or say anything or even teach without permission. So I wouldn't advertise this as, oh, come and hear this wonderful talk on hope and fear. So what I am addressing, though, is when that's emphasized, when the hope part of it is we start cranking up hope about something. We build up expectations. We start to chatter to ourselves about various dynamics that are going on, dependent on the situation of trying to get a job or trying not to go into that difficult or unstable or maybe even depressed. I hope that depression does not come back. So we're not saying that there might not be some of that, but when that happens, when any kind of hope or fear happens, what I'm saying is through your sitting practice of meditation, whether you're a Buddhist or not makes no difference to me, but what does make a difference is I would encourage you to train your mind so you can see clearly, so that you're not just working with concepts and ideas and beliefs and judgments and evaluations. This is how it looks to someone who is clear, who doesn't live out of their judgments and their evaluations and their opinions and their ideas. It looks like someone who does do that, they look like have everything, they can't see ahead of themselves because they're too operating out of what? Fear. There's a bunch of fear that won't allow them to enter just the open dimension of being, where there is no strong reference point, and where there is, you could say, a sense of fearlessness about what is happening. There's so much innate confidence that is already your birthright. It's already your birthright. This is not just Buddhism. You can take the whole teaching of Buddhism and set it aside, and still this would be the truth. It's called unconditional confidence. But you won't see that if there's this struggle or this tension between hope and fear going on that is somehow fueled. We even say, we even hear people say, well, what gives you hope? To me, this is a misunderstanding of what this whole structure called reality, or our world, or the world of this three-dimensional, four-dimensional complex that this body, speech, and mind called a human being enters and tries to figure out how to navigate, how to keep from suffering, how to get more pleasure. Quite often this is what it's about. How to get more accomplishment, how to do things, how to look good, how not to look bad. Like I'm up here trying not to look bad, but failing. So this doesn't mean that you wouldn't have some trepidation about some things. We're not saying stop doing that, or I'm not trying to particularly get you to do anything with it other than what? Bring awareness into it. See, it's like the metaphor I often use over and over again. It's like a blue sky. The mind is like a blue sky, and the thoughts and emotions and feelings and memories and everything that come into that are like clouds. They're temporary. They will not last. And so strengthen the awareness, strengthen that part of the mind that actually accommodates or allows the thoughts and emotions and feelings to come and go. So if no one asks me questions, usually my talks are very flat. But if you ask me questions, and I'm fairly good at meeting people where they're at, so if you ask me questions about these two very well known, I'm not using any Sanskrit words here, I'm using just hope. I have expectations and a desire for a certain thing to happen. And fear, I'm afraid that this keeps going this way, this is going to happen. And if you begin to operate out of either one of those as being your touchstone or your linchpin or your reference point, then you're actually tying into that, and it is what? Unreal. It's unreal. It won't last. It has a certain kind of reality, but it's very, very temporary, and it is based on relative truth. So help me give a good talk here. No, I don't want Michael's questions. Go ahead, Michael.
Can you contrast hope and fear and action?
Give me a question. It's pretty conversational, and pretty soon we'll just have to pull up a chair and start chit-chatting. What's the question?
Is fear the lack of action?
I don't think so. Fear is that you're not going to get what you want, which is maybe safety, maybe fame, maybe fear that something is going to go in another direction, that you're not going to get, that something terrible is going to happen. And if you're sitting here, we're all sitting here, and fundamentally there's not much happening. You might hope that this talk would get over with. You could go have lunch. You might fear that I'll go on and on and on, and drag on, and it would be a plight to leave. Or you might have a bus to catch at 11:30.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Gotta go in 5 minutes.
You gotta leave in 5 minutes. So, and then when he gets up and leaves, then I will fear that he's leaving because he doesn't like my talk. Or I will hope that he's leaving because it's such powerful wisdom that it can only take so much. He has to unplug and get out of here. Further question on that? Yes?
Does hope or fear have any sort of innate responsibility or function to speak of?
Well, it's been around for a long time. This is how we operate as That's how animals operate to be safe. Is that what you're addressing? So
To some degree,
it's just a natural thing of protecting oneself, advancing oneself.
is there a time and a place where it could be helpful or useful or skillful?
It's always useful. It's happening. It's the overdoing it. It's the fixation on it that causes more. If we fixate on fear, we all know someone. Maybe it's been us where we start to get fearful of something, and the next thing you know, we're adding on to it. We're adding in, and then, well, what if this happens? And then we start to imagine things that are happening that are not. They're nowhere near happening. And we might talk to that person and say, "Come on, relax. Nothing has happened yet." And the person might say, "Yeah, but it's going to. I can feel it coming." As we grit our teeth and we worry and we fret and we pace back and forth, like I was doing before I came in here, pacing back and forth. Oh my God, what am I going to say? And I usually don't talk to God. I know, not funny. Yes. Question? Yes.
Your mic is off.
Is that because I'm frolicking around too much? Now we'll have on YouTube, people will call in and complain about this. Have a good journey there, young man.
Thank you.
Bye, Jacob.
I could.
I feared that she wouldn't do that. I was hoping that she would. So a little bit of that, sure. We have to have a little bit of that, and that's happening all the time. What happens is we tend to kind of build that up and kind of rely on those dynamics, which actually it's like it shuts down the awareness. The awareness, we need to be very, very clear about what is happening around us so that we can live in an uplifted and sane, respectful way, respectful to people who are not so, maybe not, you could say, deserving of our respect. But we need to respect those people so that they give them the benefit of the doubt. We don't know what kind of turmoil that they've been going through the last 20 years that brought them into such a wild and crazy state that we might see that that's happening. But it might be much more helpful to that individual or those people to actually just be with them and not fight with them, and not get drawn into that, or not be particularly afraid of that kind of thing. Yes?
What is meant by fearlessness in this tradition?
That you have, in this tradition, it means that you, at the same time you have fear roiling up in you, you do nothing with it. You don't validate it. You don't devalue it. You do nothing with it. It's just an emotion that is coming. Everything is impermanent. So if you do anything with the fear, you give it some kind of, it's almost like it has its little mind of its own. It says, I'm being treated as if I'm real. So I guess I can hang around for a few weeks, few months, few years, few lifetimes. But don't validate it. By pushing on it, you give it validity. By pulling on it, there's aggression, and there's passion, and there's ignorance. Those three poisons, or those three activities with anything that arises, gives it a substantiality that is supported by relative truth, as if it had some kind of substance to it. And basically, it doesn't. More?
Is fearlessness non-action?
Not necessarily. Fearlessness would be, in this particular way of talking about it, would be there would be fear there, but we would not be giving that, we wouldn't be looking away from it or ignoring it or pushing it down. Well, I just have to be brave. We wouldn't do anything in particular with it. We wouldn't validate it. But we may still function in terms of what, if there's fear coming up and we're reacting to that, we're busy dealing with that kind of, the reality of that, the apparent reality of that, we actually miss the thing we probably should be doing. We should be saving the child who's drowning instead of being afraid of our own precariousness. And you'll notice that when like the talk I gave on emergencies, when there's an actual emergency, you just totally function. In terms of if you saw someone drowning, you wouldn't necessarily go towards your own self-protection. You'd save the person, more than likely. There might be some cases where people wouldn't do that. So you just function in terms of what's happening in front of you. Your innate intelligence would take over. More? Yes?
What is fear without content or without a story?
Like anxiety? Or,
Yeah, anytime just fear and
Yeah.
there's nowhere to place it.
yeah. So just having raw emotion, it's very similar to depression, because depression is like a really negative kind of feeling that keeps returning and returning. It has no particular story about it. So we can't really say it's because of this and this that I'm depressed. So very similar with that kind of baseless fear. And as far as what it is, it's fear. But as far as what the source of it is, it's so complicated. Karma are the causes and effects that cause any given situation, that cause us to be in this room, that cause us to have a particular intelligence level, or our race, our heredity, and all of the things, the mother and father we have, all the things that come together to cause any of that. If you notice, you have no say-so about any of that. We're just born, and then we're a little tiny person. Somebody gives us a name and says, "Don't hit your brother." You know, and then you follow all these instructions, and all of a sudden you get to be somebody who gets to say, "Don't hit your brother." It's like, what is that about? So when emotion comes out of unbidden, out of nowhere, this is why awareness practice is so powerful, is that if someone has trained their mind to just emphasize the spaciousness of the mind rather than the cluttered quality of the mind, of thoughts and ideas and opinions and hopes and fears, and just be present, then when something does happen, like fear comes out of nowhere, instead of immediately going to a doctor and wanting meds to suppress that, see how much awareness I have? I remember that. And now I'm touching it with my fingers. What? I heard that. So do you follow me a little bit?
How
More?
do we not, or how do we work with the desire to go into a story to make it feel better? If there's fear arising, that in and of itself is frightening, so we want to find a reason why.
Mhm.
How can we, instead of going to why, go into the actual fear?
So I think we use the word texture. I often use this especially when I'm talking to someone individually about their difficulties, or however you want to say. I say, rather than going to why, if you say a why, you're going to get a because, and then you'll look at that. Well, why is that? And then you'll get another because, and it's, as we say, it's circular. It goes round and around. It's not that it doesn't give the illusion of getting somewhere. Even a merry-go-round to a 5-year-old seems like you're making progress, but actually it's circular. And you know, so that image works a little bit, but the idea is to ask that a little bit. We tend to go too far with it. So a little bit, why is this happening? And then when nothing comes back, then you could say, rather than continue to say why, and have somebody with a certificate on their wall tell you why, and tell you need a frontal, what is that, prefrontal lobotomy? Yeah, don't do that. Come here first. And so, rather than you do a little bit of the why, and then when you see it's circular, then you immediately go into, well, what is it then? Fundamentally, what is the situation? And when we go into the what is, pardon me, I would have blown everybody's eardrums out with that one. Or not. So when we go into what is it, then we begin to go into what we call the texture, or the deep quality of that particular situation, because anything that arises as an experience has depth to it. It has surface if you just go from this to that. Why is this because of that? Well, why is that because of this? Then we tend to go, you know, we get the illusion of getting somewhere, progress or something. And the word progress is highly overrated.
A question from Jay up in Saginaw.
Jay.
He asks, what if you fear practical consequences of inaction?
Was that inaction?
Yes,
Or action?
inaction. What if you fear practical consequences of inaction?
Well, you're actually describing what you're doing, and it's a circular thing, and it's a fear that something you're not doing something, and your fear that something is going to come about because you didn't stop it or get in the way of it. So it's a very obvious thing in one way, but what is not so obvious is that we are so attracted to the story we're telling ourselves, and that we keep reiterating and we keep lecturing ourselves these little mini post-it notes in our mind that are going around about how good we are, how bad we are, how we shouldn't have done this, we should have done that, that we totally miss the spaciousness of it. Sometimes the very obvious thing to do in any given situation might come out of not something you're going to think up through some kind of a process, but just by being present. Just sit, hold your seat, sit on a chair, sit on the floor, sit on a cushion, and wait, and just observe what comes and goes. Actually I like to say, get to know yourself. And one of the ways you can get to know yourself is shut up, sit down, and watch what keeps talking. Because what keeps talking and what keeps moving is eventually, maybe not right away, but eventually is want to work with your own mind, to work with something you have some say-so about, which is your body. You can actually pick your body up off from the dining room chair and go into your bedroom or your meditation room and sit down, spend some time with your mind, and see what hope and fear is doing in your mind. Actually witness that and see what that's about. And so, same thing with to Jay's question is, rather than try to track that down and say, what does that mean, to actually sit right in the middle of that tension or that questioning. Sit right there without making any demands on anything, like demanding some kind of a response or answer. Go ahead.
Going deeper into that, or Chizan's question,
Yes.
you're sitting with something and maybe observing the texture, and you said you don't know where that comes from, or it's very
Yes.
complicated. Does karmic potentiality have to express itself in your mind or your body before it can be seen and released?
What do you mean by released?
Well, the grasping.
Well, in order to stop grasping, you first have to see the grasping, because if you feel like you're trying to stop grasping or stop being aggressive or stop doing anything, if you do it prematurely, then you're working on the concept of grasping rather than the actual grasping. The actual grasping may be a long ways from the thing that names it or the dynamic that is expressing that. More?
Well, it seems like sometimes when the story is released and we're just baking with the feeling, you kind of feel like you're in for it, and
Yeah.
then that fear of it, or
Yes.
hope to get over it, seems to override its arising. Does the difficulty need to be felt or experienced to?
I would say to give a general, it would be different in each, it's not always the case, but I would say to give a general response to that, probably so. You're probably going to have to actually bake in that, sit down in that, and be with that that emotion or that feeling. Like quite often what happens with people, they get in some kind of trouble and they immediately go into some dynamic where in modern materialistic science they medicate. And it's not that the medication won't give you some kind of relief, but it will actually prevent you from seeing the very thing that your wisdom mind, your basic sanity is trying to get you to look at. So we artificially cover it up. Okay, I'm covered up. Now I don't have to feel that. And then there's some quality of, I'm not going to say zombie, but there's some quality of actually shutting down the very part of your mind that you need to experience. And it's difficult, especially if it's a very scary stuff or very painful or a very difficult feelings like Chezan was talking about, with no explanation, no story to tell you what is this incredibly negative quality or this feeling that's arising without any rationale, reason, or whatever. So if you're a meditator, then you actually have a way of working with your mind. People who discover this practice are quite often people are very grateful they actually have a way of working with their mind where they don't have to check with anybody else. They don't have to check with me. I teach meditation, but what do I teach? I don't teach do what I say. I say find out who you are, train your mind. Go find a wall somewhere, find a floor, or sit down. All you really have to do is hold still and watch what continues to move. You just have to do a whole lot of it. Yes.
3 questions from Sandru in New York.
Sandru, my favorite psychiatrist.
You want them all at once?
How many psychiatrists are there?
His first question, as awareness grows, is there a point where I see the hope and fear isn't separate from awareness?
I think that's a good way of saying it. You see that they're just concepts that arise. They're like, one cloud might be a different shape, but there's still a cloud. Hope is just a certain kind of expression that seems positive, and fear is one that seems negative. But they're just things that arise in consciousness. Go ahead.
His next question, are we both fearless and hopeless?
Of course. Yeah, well said.
And then his last question, aren't you just saying, see the thoughts and emotions, not do something or don't do?
Yes.
A question from Rushine up in Traverse City,
Yes.
Elk Rapids. She asks, how do we let go of desire?
Not necessary to let go of desire. It is necessary to see what the desire is. If you see it fundamentally, what it is in your own personal mind, in your own personal experience, then you'll see the way in which you are grasping at something. If you try to artificially or prematurely or impulsively try to push something away before you've really seen what it is, then it doesn't work so well, because then you're kind of playing a tag team with your thought process, and you can't win because it's circular. Whereas if you wait, it's called patience. I'm sure everybody's heard of that word. I know Rushine has. Anybody with 3 children knows about patience. It's to hold still and watch what grasps, or watch what desires things to be different than they are. Very fundamental area that we all miss. I mean, when we're so involved in our work and our life and our projects and our children, we tend to miss that. So this is why it seems to be necessary for us, for those of us who are interested in this. I'm not here to sell you on anything particularly, but if you're interested in this, you can find out this. You can find out the way in which you want things to be different than they are. That's an amazing discovery. To find that you actually have a particular style of doing that is very personal to you. And it is because the way it becomes personal is because there are so many different causes and conditions that join together and actually produce something that looks like one thing. Sitting practice of meditation will align you, will begin to align you with the way in which you desire, the way in which you grasp, the way in which you reject passion, aggression, and the way in which you shut down, which is the hardest one to see. Very difficult for us to see the way we shut off our world, miss our life. Sometimes you can do this for your whole lifetime. We might know someone. If you're in this room, you're probably not doing too much of that, or you wouldn't even come here. You would just say, why would I go to a Buddhist temple?
Is there a way, like, if a lot of fear and like maybe anger also keep coming up and with the same stories, and you bake in it and tell yourself maybe that it's not necessarily real, is there a way to do something about that without, when you feel like maybe you might need to medicate that like now, to do something about that without shutting down? Is there a way to bring some kind of something to it?
The way that I teach this is meditate. Train your mind. Sit a lot. Do it a lot. You don't have to join the Buddha club You don't have to formally subscribe to Buddhism, but you could train your mind. You could sit down, hold still, and watch what your mind does. Quite often what we do is if your body is moving at all, even if you're sitting at the kitchen table, like some people walk in the woods and say this is their meditation. No, it's not. That's entertainment. We enjoy walking in the woods. And it does pacify. You know, if you're feeling really having a difficult time and you go for a walk in the woods, a lot of that backs off because the woods kind of takes over and we realize, what a beautiful place. Look at the leaves, listen to the birds, and feel the ground under our feet. There's something very nourishing about the earth, and that we're not separate from it. We don't have to think about that. We know it way, way deep. We know how close we are to this situation. So it's very nourishing. Whereas if you're having difficulty, kind of anxiety or angst in deep, and you don't know what to do with it, you could go for a walk, but it's probably going to come back. It's going to be triggered by something else. And so to do something with it fundamentally, it seems to be necessary. And again, not trying to sell, I'm just describing something that I understand over a number of years. If you just look at what it's doing, you begin to see where it gets its fuel. It has little fuel lines running to it that keep that kind of, you know, what you just described with your speech and with your body language and everything was showing me how that feels for you. And so I would say I can't take that away. Now someone else might come along and sell you a bill of goods, and it may work. It may cover that up. It may even take it away. I don't know. There might be ways to surgically remove that kind of thing. I don't know. Maybe, but who wants to experiment in that area? You know, this is not about putting your mind anything into your mind, doing anything other than just sit down, hold still. Watch the way your mind creates that and the way it fuels it, the way it brings in energy to keep that thing going. If you just look at it, it will begin to back off. Michael?
What's the difference between observing and responding to?
Responding to it? Well, responding may show up as just observing. It could. You're looking at it and you're responding in a way, and that you've turned your sense fields in that direction. You're feeling it. You're receiving. You're on receive. So responding could turn around and start to be something where you're starting to do something about it. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do something about it, but it should come out, the way I say it, it should come out of your awareness about how this looks, rather than your thought about it, which is usually based on hope and fear. I fear that if I don't do something, I got to cover this up. I need some Xanax or whatever. Is that a medication? Yeah. I need some Wellbutrin. So, and it's not that you couldn't do that. There are some people, probably that's the way they need to live. Everybody doesn't want to meditate. Some people their difficulty may be so great that may be the only thing they can do. So I wouldn't argue with that. David?
With one texture, if you have multiple stories coming up, is it necessary to discern which story is about?
Stories about things are I'm not saying they're not interesting or even entertaining, but they're not so important. It's not important to know the content of the situation. What is important is to be, whatever the leading edge of that difficulty, that suffering is to be with it. Not object to it, not agree with it, and not shut down or look away from it. And in this way, there's a possibility at some point in your meditative life that you will see the fundamental truth. And the fundamental truth is there's no solid self here. There are no solid selves out there. It's called egolessness. If you see that, all of this work is over with. And then if people give you permission, you tell them about it. If they don't, you take naps and watch Netflix. Yes?
One last question before we have to stop. Sandro again in New York says, but there's not someone who sits on a cushion or who bakes in a situation, is there? Doesn't that imply there's someone separate watching what happens?
So there needs to, yes. So Sandro, there needs to be a watcher. Initially, we need to start out with a person who's watching the feelings come and go, who's watching. We need to start out somewhere. So we start out with that watcher person, and that seems to get stronger and stronger and stronger. And then at some point, that watching person, and this is just a way of talking about it, which would happen different with everyone. But it looks like at some point that watcher who's watching the thoughts and so on turns around and looks to see who's watching. And that probably won't find anything there. And that's a big shock to the the watcher, to not find a watcher. Then it's like, now what? We have to do what?
Dedicate
Okay, we'll do that.
Stand and dedicate the merit that's in the back of your blue pamphlets. And also would like to remind everybody about our donation boxes in the hallway. Please help us, help others.
May the merit this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji-ho san shi hu shi son hu sa mo ko sa mo ko ho ja ho ro mi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our sanghas, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.